I think that's just like the runner community too. Like I'm very fond of the runners I've met. I think, of course there's so much heterogeneity in any group, but I would say these are people who aren't putting on a whole lot of makeup. They're going out and they're working hard. There's a lot of like therapy that we get on our long runs. You're so tired that you just kind of got to give it up and tell the truth.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre. If you're active at all, whether you're running or simply out walking for the day, you've probably experienced one of the number one problems that active people have, and that's chafing. Solpre's all-new, all-natural anti-chafe balm solves that problem while feeding your skin the vital nutrients it needs to be healthy. If you'd like to stop chafing once and for all and treat your body right, go to solpre.com to check out the anti-chafe balm today. And that's SOLPRI.com. Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today has a mouthful of things, so I'm going to try to get all of them through without making a mistake, but I probably will, so excuse me. She's a Martha Henry Malcolm Lovett Chair of Psychology, Professor of Management at Rice. She's been there for 22 years now. So I'm sure she's got lots and lots of stories. She told me she's won numerous teaching awards for being there, so many that Rice had to retire her from winning awards. She's the only faculty member of Rice to give a commencement address at Rice, which is pretty notable if you know anything about the school. She's run a marathon in all 50 U.S. states as well as every continent. Got at least three teenagers at home, other kids, grandkids, and her father is one of 17 children, so there's lots going on. Welcome to the show, Mikki Hebl.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Michelle, the one thing I forgot to ask you was how to say your last name before we got going, and I was like, darn it, I forgot.
It's okay. It's Mikki and it's Hebl.
Hebl.
But I'm okay if, like, whatever. I'm good. You don't have to, whatever.
It's one of those things I try to be, before we got going, as you said, and as I said, we're both talkers. So that we started going down all these rabbit holes, and I get distracted off of making sure all the little details are in place before.
That was really good, by the way. You got it all. And I was like, hey, that girl sounds interesting. So that's fine.
Hey, well, that's you. You're just living your life. You were telling me about your 50th birthday party. Sorry to dox you on your age, I guess, a little bit. But you were telling me about your birthday party, and you invited 50 badass women over. So you were telling me a little bit about the guests that you had.
Okay. So I want to do something really big and bad for my 50th. And I thought about what that was. And I thought, well, being a feminist and being like having gal pals is just something that is really been part of my life. And so I actually invited 64 women, hoping that I would get 50 women to a house for a weekend. Now, the question is, where in the world can you get a house that sleeps for the weekend 50 women? And I will tell you, 57 of them out of 64 came. So it was a really good yield. And we did it where else? We did it in Vegas. And I will tell you, we only spent an hour at the casino. Mm-hmm. But what we did was we just had inspirational speeches by some of these women who are just so profoundly amazing. They look like anything that I've done is just boring and run-of-the-mill. One's in the Guinness Book World of Records. One has a patent. One has done base camp at Mount Everest. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and they're just wonderful people. And we got together for 3 days and really enjoyed each other's company. And we had massages. We went hiking in Red Rock. We had crafts that were really fun. We had a lot of laughs. We had karaoke, and it was really a celebration of kind of gal power.
So where did you meet all of these women, I guess?
So the women were, I have to tell you, this was one of the, I think, aside from like the births of my children and my wedding, this was probably the best like weekend of my life. And they were women who I have known since grade school all the way to people I met over the last 2 years. And they just were, they had one thing in common. They were all badasses, which I hope we can say.
No, yeah, it's fine.
Okay. They just are people who don't try to, they're what I call power gals. You know, they don't try to one up you. They really are about sharing the spotlight and making sure, like I have this analogy with running. Sometimes you run with people and they try to be one step ahead of you, or they're really aware of where they are in relationship to you. And there's some people you run with and you're just talking so much, you're really not even aware. And you know that you've just run 5-10 miles and you've forgotten all about the distance because you're so into the conversation that the gal pal makes you stronger. And I would just say that metaphorically is what all of these women are.
Yeah, it's always interesting when you find that dynamic. I feel like, and you especially probably know, observationally more about this. I think about kind of U.S. culture and like how competitive we are, but it's like we all have the ability to lift each other up. Like I feel like there's this idea that things have to be a zero-sum game, and they really don't have to be a zero-sum game at all. Like just because I win doesn't mean you have to lose. Like we can both win.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that really connects to something you mentioned about me, which is my dad had 16 brothers and sisters. And so our family get-togethers, I remember we wouldn't sit at a little table, we'd sit at the ping pong table. And there was always room for one more. And it's just kind of a philosophy I have, which is it's not a zero-sum game. Let's, and something I teach when I teach executive MBAs about diversity is lift when you climb. Like we need the next generation. We want the next generation to be better and stronger. And we want to see that connection through the generations too. The fun thing was the people who came to the party, the women were aged 26 to 75. So it was also a cross-generational thing too. But yeah, I do really feel like it's not a zero sum, and it's just the world is happier when people have your back and when you're doing it together.
I wish I could remember what guest I spoke about with this about. I get a little esoteric sometimes, but I think you're the right person to do it with. I think about sometimes the purpose of humanity, which is a little heady, but I think about it, along the lines of not being a zero-sum game, about thinking that if we have a purpose, that creation is creating something. And along the lines of that, you mentioned building up the next generation or building up each other. Like that vocabulary is very purposeful in what it means to say, I'm building you up. Like you're helping create both the conditions and potentially, the influence on somebody to be something greater than they are now. So I guess sometimes when when I'm hopeful or trying to be optimistic, that's what I think about is like, humanity as a creative force for good in the world. Obviously it's more complicated than that. But just when I get that optimistic side going, that's kind of where I start to head.
Well, I just say two things about that too. Is one, I went to an all-women's college, Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. And after studying there for 4 years, I really gained an identity about gender and about the things that pioneering women and men had done to enable me to have the rights that I have. And so for me, giving back and ensuring that the next generation has even more rights than we have is something that I chose to study and do my research on. And that's easy to extend that also to race and to other stigmatized groups that don't have as much access. And then I would just, so that's been like one of my life goals, is to make the future a better place for people who have had disadvantages in the past. But the other thing is just, it's really hard not to think about humanity right now as we're going through COVID, and thinking about all the people who are suffering and how we can help and what are we doing to help. And yes, there's big things we can do to help. We can give lots of money, we can do science, but for the average, you know, and I've often heard there's the gifts of time, treasure, and talent. But the other things we can do is we can act in our local communities too. So whether it's putting a sign that says, you know, we believe in love and you're welcome here as neighbors, or whether it's, you know, reminding people in a positive way to wear their masks, or to, you know, really think about just giving a hello to people, or writing and encouraging people, or doing some service project. You know, I like to say, I think there's 8 good people in the world for every 2 bad people. Maybe that's, I don't know, other people might have differences. So my strategy is to find the 8 good people and get away from the 2 bad people, and to try to spread that joy as much as possible, because life really is short. And I think we all need to think about how we leave the world a better place than, it's like borrowing something. When you borrow something from a friend, you hopefully return it in as good of condition, if not better.
Yeah, well, thinking about your 8 and 2, so it's the Pareto principle, 80-20, right? And that, so I'm one of my undergrad majors was math, so I'm a kind of a numbers guy. So I love the Pareto principle, and it really shows up everywhere. So you're probably correct to say it's something like that. You know, whether that's the exact number, okay, but there's probably something like that. But you know, you mentioned like just saying hello, or, you know, kind of small acts of kindness. And there are days I wonder about that. This isn't to like pat myself on the back, but just like, so there's a running trail near me, and like I ride my bike, I go through a whole cross section of socioeconomic neighborhoods. And it doesn't matter where I am, if the opportunity arises, usually just you wave or you say hi or whatever. And I know there have been times myself when I'm, you know, mad or upset or whatever, like just not in the best mood. Maybe I'm out for a run and somebody says hello, and it kind of takes the edge off. You know, you're in your own head in this own little like spinning vortex, and then somebody says hello, and it's just the simplest little thing. And they're not trying to get into your world and be like, smile and be happy. They're just saying hello. It's just a tiny thing. So I wonder sometimes, or I try to remind myself when I say hello, I wonder about those people, and I think about how is their day going? You know, does it matter? You know, those kind of things. Because it matters to me when people say hello, but I can't really I'm only me. I can't really know that it matters to them. They're just strangers to me, you know?
Yeah, I'd just say to that, like, whenever I sort of teach a class, or whenever I have meetings with my graduate students, you know, I think about models that I had, and sometimes, you know, it was like, get right to the work, and what do you have for me? And I always stop and say, okay, how we doing? Like, how you doing? Like, you try to get to class a little bit early and say, how you doing? How you doing today? You know? And I think we really need that in these times, is that human connection, because we don't know what people are going through. You know, we don't know, have they been furloughed? Do they have children whose school has been called off, and now they're trying to figure out how to, you know, how to work their job and still have their child at home. We don't know about people who don't have enough money to put groceries in their cupboard. We don't know what's behind the facade of the people we meet. And the act of human kindness really can go a long way, and just sharing that and doing what we can.
It makes me wonder sometimes how, like I mentioned earlier, how we've, at least in kind of North American US culture, how we've gotten to be so individualistic. I mean, there's something to be said, especially when it comes up in sports, obviously, where it's like, especially in a sport like running or, individual efforts where it's like you are in control of your destiny. If you work hard, you'll succeed. But I also think about, no man is an island, right? Like we don't, it would be incredibly rare. Just let's take an athlete as an example, a runner. It would be incredibly rare for a runner to go all the way from, say they just start running when they're young to the Olympics, never having been coached, never having anybody drive them anywhere, never like having no input from anybody else ever. It would just be incredibly rare. Yet at the same time, we seem to forget that there's all of these inputs from all the people around us. So maybe, our athlete, they're the ones out running the laps, but, their spouse or their mother, depending on their age, father, whoever, sister, brother, somebody else is making dinner, somebody else is getting this ready for them. And there's this whole support system around them. Yet we idolize that, person or that image of that person as this thing to strive for, and almost seem to forget about everybody that helped lift them up.
Yeah, I think we live in an individualistic country where the focus is on the individual. So if you look at some Asian countries, it's very different, where it's very much a focus on the we sort of aspect. But you're right, like if you have children, one of the early decisions you kind of like have to figure out is, what are you going to sign your child up for, right? And there's sort of different philosophies. There's like, let's expose the child to a lot of different things. Let's expose the child to something and see if they have like a real penchant for it. And if they do, which, most kids have a penchant for something, then it's like, well, how much do you push it? And, if you push it, then that means lessons and a lot of time. And the more time, the Csikszentmihalyi says 10,000 hours at something will make you an expert. And so if you give the child enough lessons, so yes, there's so much. And then of course, even if you do all that, they're still often not good enough to compete at that highest level. But yeah, there sure is a whole team behind every individual success, isn't there?
Yeah. So thinking about that, I want to talk about your, I'll say, marathon endeavors or adventures, to run marathons in all the 50 states and now every continent. I'm assuming there's probably a team that goes along with that whole journey as well.
Yeah. So when I first got to Houston, this was 22 years ago, right? I had done, I think, 4 marathons maybe. And I joined this running club, and it's actually where I met my husband. And I was talking to the head of the club on a short run, and there was a guy on my left. It was the head of the club, John Phillips, and there was a guy on my right-hand side. And I was kind of feeling big and bold because I'd run whatever it was, 4 marathons. And I said to the guy on the left, how many have you done? And he said something like 35. And I was like, what? And he goes, 35. And I go, well, how many have you done? To the other guy. And he goes, I don't count anymore. And I was like, no. So then very soon after that, I really wanted to qualify for the Boston Marathon. And I'll just tell you, I did that. And after I did that, I realized, okay, I can get a faster time and I can keep getting a faster time, but it's going to take a lot of work and it's going to be really painful. And it's like, I'm going to get a couple more minutes faster. And so somebody in the club had told me about this guy his name is Steve Boone. And he's this crazy, wonderful man from north of Houston who started the All 50 States Club. And I thought, wow, that's such an amazing thing. And these 4 states that I had were all in different states. These 4 marathons I had done were all in 4 different states. And I thought, what do you have to do to join that? Well, you had to get 10 different states. And so I thought, well, that's a good goal. Like maybe I could do that and then spend the rest of my life traveling to these different states and trying to see the states and run marathons. And so there is a group with that. And a lot of times, you would link up and see who else is running in these states that you're going to. And then there were also always students. So I did do them sometimes by myself, but a lot of times I did them with another person, whether it was a colleague, a student, or somebody from the 50 States Club, or my husband.
Right. Do you end up, is it just that you're both at the starting line at the same time, or do you end up finding people where you're of a similar pace?
So running a marathon is kind of a hard thing because running a marathon is a really hard thing to begin with. And anybody who finishes a marathon and gets any sort of time, my hat is off to them, because every time I had a baby, which is 3 times, I had to stop running. And then I think Bill Rogers, the Boston Marathon winner, said, it's a lot easier to stay in shape than it is to get back into shape. And with all 3 of my babies, like you're looking at somebody who's lost over 100 pounds if you count all of the 3 different, and every time I had to start running that first mile again, I was like, holy shit, 1 mile is a long, long way. Okay. So what I would say about running a marathon is marathon's hard. Running a marathon with another person the whole way is also really hard, because it's very rare that you find 2 people running at the same pace that's comfortable at all points in the marathon at the same time. That said, I have run a lot of marathons with a person side by side. Usually it's the case when I do that I am the stronger runner helping somebody who is a first-time runner through that. That's not always been the case. I have a gal who is such a good runner. Her name is Malia, and on a couple marathons, she's called me the night before and she said, where's your race? Can I go too? And she runs it right next to me with talking the whole time. And I'm like, you are so amazing. So there's been times where I've also said, you need to go ahead now, or we'll go to the race and I'll say, okay, here's our different plans. We'll see you at the end.
Yeah, I was just curious, just since it seems like you're kind of bringing together a bunch of, I'll say, random people, obviously not random entirely, but just, even with when I ran in college, we all trained together, but even for, 8K, 10K, 5K, we're going to be at disparate speeds at different times. Yes. And racing this, maybe I'm ahead this time and then another guy catches up and passes me, and just different parts, different parts of the course suit us differently. One guy's good at hills, the other one's better at flats. So I was just curious whether you actually found people that it's like, hey, we're going to go the whole way. I've not done a marathon, since I ended up specializing in triathlons, similar kind of time frame, but not done the marathon by itself. So I just didn't know, if you could find a close enough grouping to have somebody stuck with you the whole way.
So there's 2 more things to say about that. One is, if you know the time you're going to do, then in almost all of the marathons, they have somebody who is a pacer group. And right. So you can stick with that group, and that's really nice. I've done that a few times and it's really been helpful. I will say that it's really depressing when you lose your pacer group at the end, and a marathon is so hard. So I have a graduate student. She just graduated. She's now a professor. Her name's Abby, and we've run about 4 or 5 together, and we've run them always side by side. And there have been times where I bonked, and there have been times where she's bonked, and we've stayed together. And probably on those different races, there are times where she could have gone ahead and finished well before me, and vice versa. But for us, it was the fact that we could finish 15 minutes before the other person at best wasn't worth the 4 hours of enjoyment that we had running together. And as most marathoners know, there's kind of the first 21 miles And that's one thing. And then there's the last 5 miles. The last 5 miles is so awful. And in some races, that to have your buddy there is to just really have a wonderful experience. And that's to me why I have really enjoyed running marathons with first timers, because I know that they're going to be happy and like wonderfully like motivated for the first 21 miles. And then the last 5 miles, they go, you know, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this isn't fun. And that's where it's like, yes, it is. We can stop, massage your legs, and then let's keep moving. Okay. And that's been fun to do with, I would say probably 8 or 9 people.
Yeah, well, it seems like everybody talks about the wall at some point. You at 21, I've heard 23 before. You know, it's interesting that it seems to be, you know, I wonder whether it's how much is physiological and how much is psychological now, since it's such a thing. You know, people talk about it, everybody knows about it. So it's like, and there's that, you know, there's the thing with your mind where it's like, I'm sure you've had races where you finish and you're like, once you stop, you absolutely cannot get going. Like you're done. Versus if you had kept running, you probably could have kept going for a while because your mind tells you can go. So is that interesting thing that your brain does to continue, you know, keep you in motion. So I wonder, I don't even know how, I feel like it would be almost impossible to figure out how to study this, but just, I wonder what the split is in terms of people actually, you know, bonking versus psychologically hitting a wall at that point.
Yeah, well, I will tell you there are marathons where I feel like I bonked at mile 7. And then there are marathons where I feel really good at the end. And I think, you know, a lot of it has to do with your fitness, the course, the day of, what you ate. And of course, there is the physiological, the aerobic and anaerobic threshold of how far you push yourself and what you're burning, and whether you start burning, you know, like there is really something to it physiologically, I would say. But I also think there are races where, I remember there was a race in Indiana, and it was on the Notre Dame, it ended on the Notre Dame 50-yard line. And I was like, what? It ends on the Notre Dame 50-yard line? I said to my husband and my friend Malia, I said, when I get to the 50-yard line, they throw you a football and you get to run with it the last like 10 yards. I'm like, I'm going to chant Rudy, Rudy, and I'm going to run the whole like 100 yards. And let me tell you, when I got to the 50-yard line, I didn't want to run one more yard. Okay. Cause you're just so tired, and you get kind of whiny in a lot of races, and you feel like, how much farther is it, you know? And you feel like, you know, it's how much farther because there's a mile marker, but you just, you know, you kind of, and then the very first race I ever ran was the San Antonio Marathon. I was in graduate school, and I was running, and I had this, like, my whole idea was, don't stop. You cannot walk. You cannot walk. You have to keep going. And when I crossed the finish line, I was still running right past like the finish line trying to stop. And this guy caught me, and he goes, you can stop now. And I go, I'm trying. And so you get a little nutty in the head too. Well, at least some of us do, because, you know, you get so persevering or set on a goal, or just because you're so exhausted that, you know, there's a little disconnect between your brain and your body.
Yeah, well, it's like you get those muscles start firing. Well, I mean, they've been firing for hours and hours in that same pattern, and it's like all of a sudden you're like, you don't have to do that anymore. And sometimes they're like, no, this is what we're doing today.
Yeah, that's right.
So thinking about persevering in tough situations, you were telling me that you took a cruise and ran a marathon on a cruise ship.
I did. So well, the first thing that happened is I finished all the 50 states, and I did it in 15 years, so I didn't need, you know, the rest of my life. I started doing them, and then one year I did 11 in a row, and I had 3 babies during that time. And so it was kind of like, wow, I did that. At the end, I really just wanted to get them done too. I was like kind of eager to get that done. And then once that was done, people said, what are you going to do now? And I said, I'm going to sit on the couch and get fat. And I did that. And then a year later, I got a call from a friend, so long as we can talk about it later if you want, but it was basically to do Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
And so she like called up all her crazy friends and they said no. So then she had to dig real deep and go to her real crazy friends. And that's how I got roped into that. So after that, people said, well, if you did Antarctica, then you're going to do all the states. So you might as well just do it. And so actually the last continent I had was Africa. And I decided to do something that was a little bit rogue, and that's that I did semester at sea. I was a faculty member for a semester. We took our family and took them out of school and sailed around the world to 16 countries in Asia and Africa. And so I had, about 6 places in Africa where I could do it. And it was getting kind of late. And so I decided what I would do is I would do it on the ship, and I would do laps on the ship in Morocco. And so that is what we did. I actually had to stop in the middle of it to get my passport stamped because they come onto the ship and stamp your passport. But it was 192 loops on the ship. And I did it with a very good friend whose family, their names are the Belfioris, and they are Microsoft execs. And they ran and walked it with me. And it was really amazing. Crazy, really crazy.
The loop thing, it reminds me of, this is a much more minor non-achievement, but just, so in college we had this athletic center which had this really old school track, like built in the, I don't know, late 70s, early 80s, not a surface that's really up to par nowadays. It's not beat up, but just, it's very slick. It's not really good for running. And every once in a while, one member of the distance team, say during the winter time, would decide, I don't really want to go outside. I'll just run inside. And they'd have it'd be like, I need to do like a 10-mile run. Like I did an 8-mile run inside this building. It's a 160-meter track. You're going to do 8 miles on that. So like, I know a little bit of the insanity of doing small laps over and over and over. But then you also had, was the ship moving or was it?
Yeah, it was moving at the beginning.
Yeah, so you got that.
Yeah. And I had to remember. And so what I did is I wore a white t-shirt and I put next to the water bottles that we had laid out in the goo, I put a Sharpie.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to make a tick every time I came around because there's no way I could have remembered it otherwise. But yeah, it was a little crazy. So if the ship was moving and then it docked into Morocco, the agents came on. At that point in time, we were still running. The ship was just steadied. And then we had to stop for about probably 5 minutes and go get our passport stamped. And then we just went right back out and did it again as if it were like a 5-minute rest stop. Now, I have to tell you, like, that's the only marathon I've run of my probably 75, 76 marathons that was not official. So that's really not an official one, but the other ones all were. So I think I'll find myself back in Mauritius or some African country to finish it out at some point in time. But, I feel like, if you want to be a bean counter, you can say, well, is that really official? But, the truth is we really did do it. I had about 3,000 or not 3,000, probably 800 students observing the craziness.
So you're having people yell at you the whole, I mean, it's a loop. There's clearly people around. Nobody's going anywhere. Are you having like, just like crowd noise the whole way around the whole time?
I wrote on my t-shirt, I can't stop, I'm doing a marathon.
Okay.
So that they saw it. And then they saw the ticks. And they were cheering. They were coming out and cheering. Yeah.
So you
It
had
was
like
fun.
yeah, so you had some like pick me ups. It wasn't just like you by yourself run around a
No.
cruise ship.
No. The Belfieres did it with me.
Yeah.
My daughter did, I don't know how many laps she did. She did quite a few. And then, we'd have some people join in for a little bit just to say, hey, how you doing? And I think there were 2 other college students who did half of the marathon with us. So, there were some people coming and going. And a lot of times that happens in a marathon too, where, you have a little support on the side, whether it's my husband who will run half the marathon or run the last 5 miles with me, or, I've had my kids join me for the last 3 miles, or my son will do half of it with me now, whatever. So that pick me up is pretty key.
So what I want to know is that once you're done, but as you mentioned, you may end up doing an official one back in Africa. Once you're done with that, do we have to get you on a shuttle, or are we doing like different atmospheric levels? We get into space and doing a marathon?
No, I will say that I thought I was pretty neat until I went to Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized just how plain I was. And what I will say is that was a race where it was run out of Minnesota by this guy named Mikki Hebl. And it was a 10-day experience. And my friend Susie Seeley, who is in the Guinness Book of World Records for running the fastest 50 states. I think she's over 55 or something, but she's in there. And she was on the trip and was the one who said, I want to do this. Will you come with me? And I said, sure. We got on that plane and got to Antarctica and got down to, we actually went to South America, Punta Arenas, and we did 2. So the day after Susie and I did the Antarctic one, we did one in South America. So we could get 2 continents done in 2 days. The people there were crazy. I mean, there was a woman there who had summited Mount Everest. She was the first woman from Portugal who had done that. There were people who had done like 250 that year. I mean, it was like somebody who was 14 and she was the first one to do all the continents. And then there was a boy who was like something like 11 and he was the one to do all the continents the fastest. And it was like, you go, oh my God, when does this craziness stop? So I would say that what I want to do now is, so I fell down a mountain, stupid, and I tore my ACL, and that was a year and a half ago, and it was my first injury ever. And I've always said to people, look, if you have sheer determination and you have good knees and ankles, I can help you run a marathon. And I still believe that. So I had rehab on it, and now I've run 2 marathons afterward, and they've been fine. I'm back. I don't think, as we get older, there's another saying, the older we get, the faster we used to run, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you were in college, Jesse, you probably thought, oh, these times are okay. And now you look back and you go, those times were fast.
Yeah, I was actually doing, I had this workout the other day at the track. My coach had me doing, it was like run on time. He didn't say, run these specific times. He said 200 fast, 200 easy. And we have 5 miles of that. And the 200 fast time, like I could basically only do it for 200. And then I wasn't going to be able to keep it going. That's my 5K speed. My fastest 5K speed is like my 200 fast now. So it's like I'm a couple minutes slower compared to what my fastest 5K was.
Yeah, and it's not going to get better.
No.
So, I have some goals. My husband did the Houston Marathon 20 years in a row. So I was always like, I'm not doing that. Why would I run the same course? I know exactly how far that is, and it's far. Even though it's the same distance, it just feels like, oh, let me leave my house.
Yeah, you got fresh scenery. You got different people, different habits. Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So now I kind of feel like I want to support the Houston Marathon much more. I've done it, I think, 7 or 8 times, and I'd like to do that 20 times, not to best him, but to equal him.
Mm-hmm.
I also really like to do marathons in places where I'd like to do them. I'd like to do Big Sur. I'd like to do the one in St. George's in Utah that's supposed to be downhill the whole way. We have a place in Boulder. I'd like to do the Boulder Reservoir. So kind of like, I'd like to do Paris, and see the city. So those are some of the things I'd like to do. And then I like to do things with first timers still. Like, it's still exciting to me because when you run a marathon with a person, you bond with them forever. Like, they remember it. And that's a really special feeling. So those are some of the things.
Yeah, I made this shirt. There was a particular year of guys in college that we got along so well. And, there's a saying that blood is thicker than water. So I had made up the saying that miles are as thick as blood. And that was our shirt for that year. Because it really is that's your, that's your family. We were together pretty much every single day, just about 7 days a week. All year. It's a very intense thing. And yeah, there's definitely a bond there that you don't find, in other settings.
I think that's just like the runner community too. Like, I'm very fond of the runners I've met. I think, of course there's so much heterogeneity in any group, but I would say these are people who aren't putting on a whole lot of makeup. They're going out and they're working hard. There's a lot of like therapy that we get on our long runs. You're so tired that you just kind of got to give it up and tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of humility, and marathon runners are a special breed because they're really determined people. There's a lot of type A, they're just kind of, it's sort of, to me, a way of life. Like, I think of teaching, I think of my career, I think of my life as sort of, there's some miles that are hard and there's some that are easy. There's some that are uphill. There's some that are downhill. There's some surprises around the corner. And it's really about the journey and not just about the end point.
Mm-hmm. So I wonder if, because I'll say dissect, but study and dissect people, I'm being a little facetious with that word, but I wonder, do you ever, when you meet all of these, I'll say extraordinary individuals, you're talking about all the people you met in Antarctica, do you ever look at them and talk to them and try to like get inside their heads and figure out what it is that motivates all of these people?
I think a little bit different. Like, I think it makes me think that every single person is in there. Like, one of my favorite shows growing up was Biography. I just loved it. And I think that our job, or at least my job, is to figure out what makes you special. Like, what can you teach me? Like, every person can teach us something.
Mm-hmm.
So, you've been talking about me a whole lot. And, one of the things I'm going to do is learn as much as I can about you, because I like to learn about that. And I think for them, it's like what's interesting about them is a little bit more outward facing than it is than some people. So, I don't think I'm arrogant, but I also don't think I'm the most humble person you've ever met. And so I'd say people who get on a plane and go to Antarctica are kind of putting themselves out there. So their stories are pretty clear, right? And when you go around rooms and you say, in that same rugged individualistic spirit, here's something unique about me, it's easy to say, oh, that's crazy. That's what makes you tick. I think it's more of a challenge or more exciting to take the average person that isn't like that and to say, so what's pretty spectacular about you? And I think when you dig deep enough, you find, wow, they got some, like the guy down the street, he grew up with monkeys, like in his house. I'm like, what? That's like crazy, I mean, that's just outrageous. The other person down the street, my next door neighbor, grew up 20 minutes from me in Wisconsin. And here we are in this different state. So it's like, and it's not just me focused, but it's like each person is a biography and a narrative. And if you're willing to put enough time in, there's so many interesting things to find out about every person and to learn from.
This is a little bit of a divergence, but thinking about narratives and people, I always think about like, there's this convergence of like the story we tell ourselves about who we are versus the story that other people think is our story. Do you see, like, when you see these things, does it help you kind of reconcile the story that you have about that person to the story that they tell themselves about themselves, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that a little tiny differently and say that's a really good, like there's something in psychology that's very similar to what you're saying,
Mm-hmm.
and it's called the self as a narrative. So there's sort of this like, here are the experiences that, like if I said to you, how did you get involved in this podcast? You could say, oh, well, I always wanted to do podcasts. I like to talk, blah, 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 blah. And that's the story that's been woven because it kind of makes sense, right? And people don't really want to hear, well, okay, so this is the real random events that happened that led me to this thing. So we kind of tell over and over our narratives, and they become a little bit
Embellished?
They get better. Yeah, they get embellished, or maybe we just have, like, we get better storytellers. We're better storytellers, right? Yeah. So we go, well, that's not really that relevant. Let's drop that off. And that's kind of interesting. And so let's add that to it. And so people sometimes describe the self as a narrative. So it's like how we tell our story, our narrative is a reflection of ourself. And I think that's kind of an interesting sort of thing, is how people talk and explain how they got, just stories they tell is really a reflection of themselves. If I think of how, my story and my narrative, I'd say, I can make it consistent. It's really a lot of random coincidences. It's a lot of people who handed me off to guardians, people who allowed me to stand on their shoulders, a lot of really random luck. And I'm looking forward. Like, I'm not looking back. I'm looking at, but I still have so much to do. Like, I have those publications in 2019, but that was last year. What do you got this year? And, what you said, which is, well, what are you going to do now? Right? Mm-hmm. Like, now that you've done this, are you going to go out into space and do that? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I'm thinking that too. Like, I'm thinking I got to do these races. So I think, there's some people who write their narrative looking backward, and that makes me a little sad because I like to think forward. And there's some who are really in the present and can be very chill about it. Like, whatever comes, and then there's some people who are like, well, I gotta keep achieving and I gotta keep doing things. And that's probably me. And I don't know that that's the best place to be too. Maybe maybe the present is the best one.
The present is probably the toughest though. And that's what the whole mindfulness thing is about, right? It's like being here right now in this moment, not worrying about what happened or what's going to happen or what you think is going to happen, just being right here. But Peter Sage, there we go, is a serial entrepreneur. He talks about, as I mentioned, one of my undergrad majors was math. The other one was psychology, because I'm ridiculous. And what are you going to do with those two majors? But so I'm interested in people, but just like the way he presented it is that what I mentioned, the idea that there are stories we tell ourselves about who we are, and the source of our stress is when our actual story diverges from our expectations of reality.
Yes.
So
agreed.
You're right. So it's like, I don't often get the chance to speak to professors of psychology anymore. So it's like, pick your brain a little bit while we're here, even though it's a little bit of a divergence. So we'll say you're average people, in quotes, of course. So if you're listening, you're not listening to the video version. I'm doing air quotes. But but the average people that don't necessarily stand out with their heart on their sleeve about who they are and have all their badges on their uniforms, you know, do their stories seem to get in the way of what you think could be their potential?
Yeah, I mean, I think like just a couple of things. Like, I always think that class reunions are kind of a sad idea for some reason. And I think it's because I want to believe that everybody did really well and is self-actualized and doing great. And sometimes people get old, and I don't mean old. I am actually using old in a pejorative sense, and that's a shame. I shouldn't do that. But I mean, like, they're 25 or 35 and they're old, meaning like they've kind of given up. They're content. Maybe that's, and I don't mean content either. They've just given up on themselves without realizing their potential or their specialness, without saying, hey, I can do something. It's kind of like they're living and going through the motions. And if they are content, I think that's wonderful. I don't see that content on some of them. And so I see this kind of, wasn't I great in high school? Or, yeah, those were the days. And I'm like, those were the days. Like, we're looking forward. We're still getting better. And it's that kind of youthful sort of focus on ourselves as we can improve ourselves that I think I've always had. And maybe it's also working with students and, you know, working with these students who are about to go out and change the world. It rubs up off on you. You know, I once got to see Archbishop Desmond Tutu give a talk, and he gave this talk. He got on the ship in Mauritius while we were traveling to South Africa. And these people were like, what are you doing on this ship at 88 years of age talking to these young students? Like, you've done it all. You got a Nobel Peace Prize. Like, what are you doing on the ship? And he says, I want to talk to as many young people as possible because they're the future. They can make the changes. And I remember sitting there as like, I don't know, I was like 40 something. And I'm like, oh, am I one of the young people too? Like, are you talking to me? You know, and I think that, like, so I don't mean the old in a pejorative sense. I mean, stay woke, stay willing to change, stay youthful in your minds, believe that you're still green, and that you, no matter your age, like, that there's still potential for you to be all that you can be, you know? Well, that sounds like the military, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like there's the idea about beginner's mind, right? Which I'm sure you've heard that. Or it's like, even if you are like an expert, the best experts still have beginner's mind, where they don't lift themselves up as like, I'm this expert. It's like you mentioned at the very beginning, not in the beginning, but earlier, everybody has something you can learn from them. I mean, that's the essence of beginner's mind. Is you're not, you know, obviously we've got the nice read off for you, and you've got a CV as long as a book, but you're not like, well, I'm hot shit, just look at me. It's, no, I want to learn from you. Like, that's the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
Is figuring out, what can I still learn? Not, I already know it all. But, you know, you're talking about, and I'm not sure how to classify it else either, old or giving up, or I don't think content is quite right. But I'll see that from, you know, people I went to high school with on social media who, and these are often the art friends that I had, that maybe they went to college for art, or they, you know, they really gave everything that they could for this dream. And it to this point hasn't panned out how they want it to. And that isn't to say that it won't. I have no idea. But they're not fulfilled, or they're not where they expected to be. And they'll say something like, you know, I wish I could start over, or I should have done something different, or something like that. But without the idea of, well, you can start over. Like, it's going to be painful. It's going to be arduous, just like it was the first time. but you can start over. And I can't remember where I first came across this advice. The idea, I think it was somebody, a random forum posting on the internet probably, speaking to their child about whether they wanted to become a doctor. Their kid was considering, do I try to go to medical school? It's so much school. I'm going to be almost 30 by the time I'm done with school. And their parents said to them, well, you're going to be 30 whether you go to medical school or not. So do you want to be a doctor when you're 30, or do you just want to be 30? You know, and I think about that same thing for the people that say, I wish I'd done something else. It's like, okay, so maybe things didn't work out how you wanted them to. Is there something else you want to do? Like, you're going to get older whether you pursue that thing or not.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you know what? I'm going to use like a metaphor I used before, which is they're looking backward. So it's really not about age. It's not about content, because there's some people who are just happy not having, you know, they didn't get the art thing. They worked their heart out. They found something else. They're really like enjoying life, and that's great. But it's the people who are still looking backward and living their life through looking backwards of should-haves, could-haves, wish I had, oh, that was the best and it's never going to get better, that I'm like, oh, like that's like bad. No, you can do better than that. Like, you know, and it's not just an achievement. Sometimes I feel like I'm too achievement oriented. It's not about that. It's about just believing that you can keep learning and growing.
Well, I think along with that, and you're welcome to correct me at any point, is that you know, you mentioned being achievement oriented, which I'm very much that way, but there's also all these non-achievement aspects of life to be enjoyed, and being in the present, you know, just right now, where, yeah, okay, so there's the trope about, you know, the high school football star, that was his peak, you know, the high school quarterback, and he didn't go to college, and like that was the highlight, and he's all, you know, goes to the class reunion, he's like, remember when I threw that 50-yard touchdown to Ricky and everybody cheered? It's like, well, yeah, we remember it, but what have you done since then? But it's like, okay, so he didn't become a college or even pro football player, but like maybe he has a family and like he can enjoy time with his kids, and there's or his spouse or whatever. Even if he doesn't have kids, doesn't matter. There's so many other aspects. Maybe he likes woodworking and really enjoys building chairs.
Yeah,
just enjoy,
absolutely.
like do your thing, you know, like enjoy building chairs. You don't even have to be the best chair maker. You could be a terrible chair maker, but if you're present and you're enjoying that thing, you're no longer looking back to that 50-yard touchdown pass that you threw 30 years ago. It's like, it's just, I'm enjoying shaving wood right now, and that's enough, you know?
Yeah. And I would just say, give some chairs to some other people too.
Right.
Because to me, it's always, again, about paying it forward and making it a little bit better for the next generation or for the people around you.
Sharing the wealth. So as we start to run down a little bit on time, there's a question I'm asking everybody this year because it kind of transects all my guests. And we'll ask you the same. What do you think the purpose of sport is?
Oh, gosh, I don't think it's one single thing. I think, you know, I always tell my kids, like my kids will laugh if they hear this. I always say your body is a temple. You know, your body is a temple. And what we want to do is we want to really eat well and be conscious and thoughtful and mindful of what we're putting into our bodies. And we also want to exercise our bodies. And we want to really think about our bodies not just as adornment, so something beautiful, but also as a tool. And so I think of sports as a way to refine that tool, or to enjoy and see your tool in action. So I've done quite a few triathlons. And now as I get older, I realize I can't do that anymore because there's too many things you have to remember to bring to a triathlon.
There are a lot of things. But
my husband and I, for our wedding, this is like our wedding where we went. Okay, our honeymoon was the Ironman, Wisconsin,
Mm-hmm.
which is a silly thing. But I always start these triathlons and these marathons in something that's not that's sort of more scattily, like I'm more scattily clothed. I have like a jog bra on and some shorty shorts. And I always get at the starting line and I look around and I feel that thing that a lot of us feel, whether we're women or men, which is, oh, look at that body. That's so much better than me. They're going to win. Oh my God. I'm like
Yeah.
so fatty fat, blah, blah, blah. And then I get running, right? And then I get out of the water and I'm transitioning. And then I'm on the bike and my legs are working. And I start transitioning from this belief of body is adornment to body is tool. So that at the end of the triathlon or at the marathon, I don't care who's looking at me. I couldn't care less because my body just did something amazing. And I think sports has the ability to really help women in particular with that sort of change in mindset of, oh, I'm fat. Oh, this doesn't, this, da, 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 to saying, no, my body's a tool. Like I can swim in the ocean. I can, jump up over the hurdle. I can run. And, we didn't talk a whole lot about marathoning, but marathoning, when it's going well and when you really don't feel, and there's been some races where I felt runner's high and I didn't feel the bonk. And that's when you just feel like, man, this is such a great body I have. And no, it's not perfect by any model standard, but look what it's allowing me to do. And sports, to me, at least a big part of it for me is treating your body like a temple and realizing that it's your temple. And this is the outlet that you're going to use it to perform in.
There's a whole other rabbit hole we can get down to, but as like I said, we're running out of time. That's the bad thing about time constraints is we could go in a whole other rabbit hole, which is kind of your specialty in terms of diversity and stuff. I guess I will say we'll run a little over time if you don't mind.
Not a bit.
I noticed one of the things I noticed. It started when I was in high school. One of my high school coaches, he coaches girls swim, and then he also coaches cross country and then distance and track. And his philosophy is I treat the girls the same as I treat the guys. Like a workout is a workout. But what we've noticed is that there are more and more women coming out for at least those sports in particular, and less guys coming out. And I'm not quite sure why. I mean, it's which is awesome that we're getting more women to come out, but then we're also somehow losing the guys. I don't know if they're going to football. Maybe that's what's happening. But it's I don't know, just kind of an interesting observation. I don't really have any like super deep thoughts about it, but I don't know if you kind of noticed that trend.
I haven't, but I'm going to look for it. I mean, I will say, I think that okay, so we hadn't done a triathlon in a long time, and I was trying to figure out what to get my husband for Christmas. So I said, hey, honey, Merry Christmas. We're going to do a half Ironman. This is like 15, 20 years after we did our first one.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go and do it, and we are just incredulous about how the sport has changed. And we do see a lot more women. But this, at least in running and in triathlons, the sport used to be very male dominated. You could go back to the Boston Marathon where they pulled Catherine Swift off the course, like women weren't allowed to run. So I think for me, I was just amazed at the sheer number entirely, and the fact that my little stealth black bomber, I used to call it, was so aerodynamically outdone by all the new gadgets and by all the people zipping past. That to me was the most shocking, is just how everybody is doing this sport of marathoning. Like, you know, there used to be marathons where you would, of course you'd get into it. And now there's lotteries because so many people are doing it. And I think there's certainly, for me, I guess what I see is the men are not going down, but the women are going up so much that it may look like the percentages are going down. But that's, to me, great, because we know for women and for men, sports are such a self-esteem build. They can also be a detriment too, but they're to a large extent, they're a self-esteem builder.
Yeah, well, in my particular case, or not in my case, but the observation of my coach, it may be there may be socioeconomic factors at play, because like the high school I went to is in a kind of a weird cross section. Anywhere, like I would say now, I would have to ask him, but I would say probably half the school is on free lunch, and then you also have so I'm in Kansas City, so houses aren't terribly expensive, but you'll also have kids who have parents who live in $300,000 houses, which is above the median price for Kansas City. So you have this kind of wide cross section, but generally speaking, economically, the area is kind of, I'll say gone down, but just the way the district has shifted, it's gotten more kids in poverty, or, you know, if parents who don't earn as much. So I kind of wonder if that's a factor as well, whether they, you know, maybe they're going out and doing jobs after school instead of sports, or, you know, that kind of stuff, with how that factors into it. But I know, like with him, he has a history of, he grew up in a, like, his parents didn't make anything basically. And he ended up going to Harvard, and he was almost had the Missouri State mile record. The only reason he doesn't have it is because he was beat in that race by the guy who does have it. But he has a history of, you know, from his kind of background to running to building a company, selling it. He's basically retired. He teaches because he wants to and mentors kids, thinking about giving back to the next generation. He has a history of taking, like, his swimmers. He just says, these are my blue collar girls, and, you know, getting them often a portion of them to, you know, college scholarships where maybe they didn't have opportunities otherwise. And so I kind of wonder if too, it's like the girls seeing, like, this could be an opportunity for me to go to college where it may be more difficult too, you know, otherwise.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, you know, one of my colleagues, Ruth Turley, does work on how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And, you know, one of them is just how much wealthy people can afford enrichment programs for their kids, right? And part of enrichment programs is, you know, sporting teams that are city leagues and things like that. And I know we put our daughter in a volleyball league, and they told me the amount, and I go, wow, for a second there, I thought you meant that was for her individually, but I get it. It's for the whole team. You just gave me a heart attack. And they said, oh no, it is for her individually. And I was like, are we buying a building? Like, what are we doing? And it's just not a price that people can afford. And this is a feeder for kids who want to play, you know, college volleyball. And yes, you can go to a high school and do really exceptionally well, but that's a school where it's one season, and this enrichment program is all year long. And if we have the 10,000 hours Csikszentmihalyi rule, again, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, of course it makes sense that economics are going to play a role in who gets ahead, and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah. Before we get too far down this rabbit hole, maybe I have to have you back on later another time. We'll get farther down this rabbit hole. Mikki, if people want to see research, find you, see what you're up to, where can they figure out where you are and kind of what's the most recent stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, so I have a web page. If you go to, my last name is Hebl, And if you just type in Hebl, you're not going to find too many people. It's a really weird last name. And if you type Rice University, you'll find me. You'll see my webpage. I have a list of the marathons I've done for all the people who are really interested in how fast does she run. And I'll tell you, it's not that fast. My fastest time was a 7:47 pace, which I'm proud of, but I call myself a hamburger, and I've run with some real steaks. So that's my metaphor for that.
Okay.
So yes, done the Boston lots of times, but I have a little thing next to each of the races that tell you who I did it with, or I say like one little comment about it. And that's on my webpage. If you're interested in reading about research on diversity and discrimination and gender issues, there's a research page. There's sort of a lab page to see who I'm training and where the alumni are located. That you can find me there. And of course, if you're interested in questions, you can always email me at hebl@rice.edu. And I would love to return as your guest anytime. I love to talk about sports. I love to talk about marathoning. And basically, I just love to talk.
It's dangerous when you get two talkers together. So that's why I was like, I kept having to like watch my clock. I'm like, how are we doing? Anyway, we'll end there for today at least. We'll probably talk in the future. But thanks for spending time with me.
You're welcome.